Welcome to the GreenPilled Network podcast. If you're just joining us, we're building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers using crypto to bring positive sum digital systems to the world. We feature the people who are doing it, and we publish a season of about a dozen episodes every couple months. This season is Lean Mean Capital Allocation Machines. In what way is on-chain capital allocation going to be weirder, more scalable, more democratic, more precise than what was possible before Web3? How can we build crypto economic systems that precisely allocate capital at scale? What are the coolest experiments? These are the themes of Greenpill Season 4, Lean Mean Capital Allocation Machines. My guest today is CoachJ, who has held several roles over 2.5 years at Gitcoin, who's the memes, marketing, and merch workstream lead, was an ecosystem collective lead, and is now a writer and author. Today, we are talking about the Grant Program Design Canvas, a new free PDF ebook that is your complete guide to launching and growing a grants program. So if you're in an ecosystem that has a bunch of capital and wants to create growth in your ecosystem through a grants program, and you are someone who has been thrown in the deep end by your ecosystem leads or DAO governance in designing the grants program, the grants canvas is for you. So basically, the canvas lays out the define, design, execute, and learn stages of a grants program and guides you through the best practices, putting together a grants program. The canvas is a vehicle for designing that. And so I think that what this does is it sort of bottles up 5 years of experience of running grants programs at Gitcoin into a PDF that is your guide for running a on-chain grants program. And hopefully it's useful to you, a Web3 capital allocator who is working on a DAO, who is working on a grants program, or is just interested in the nuts and bolts of practically doing on-chain capital allocation. So this episode is about the grants canvas. And again, it was written by CoachJ of the Gitcoin ecosystem. You can download resource at grantscanvas.gitcoin.co for free. And you can purchase a physical copy there. If you're going to ETHCC, please remember to RSVP for the Grants Canvas launch party, which will be at ETHCC. The links for that are in the show notes. All right, without further ado, let's get into CoachJ and the Grants Program Design Canvas. Enjoy. What's up, CoachJ?
Hey, GM Kevin.
I am really excited to talk to you today about the Grants Canvas. What is the Grants Canvas?
That's a good question. The Grants Canvas is basically a go-to tool on how to launch and grow a grants program. So there's a canvas as well as a book called the Grants Canvas Design. And it was really created to help growth leaders create, manage, optimize high-impact grants programs without missing any details. And it's a really visual, modular approach. And it actually streamlines this really complex grants program planning process into 4 really easy phases that we could talk about. And then those phases are further broken down into specific building blocks. And it really just allows you to shorten the planning process so that you can focus more of your time and energy on attracting builders rather than planning a grants program. So that's the TLDR.
The user story that I sort of have for the grants program is that you joined a project that is about to do a token generation event or is trying to plan a grants program, and you've maybe done community stuff, you've maybe been around the Ethereum scene for a while, and your boss is like, hey, we have $100 million in treasury and we have to turn those into growth. Like, can you start a grants program? And you're like, oh shit, what do I do? And it feels like the grants canvas is it's like a life raft for people who have a bunch of tokens and need to figure out how to do a grants program, but aren't sure the best practices. It's an all-in-one piece where people can kind of it'll usher you along in starting a grants program. And so, I'm wondering if you can take us, is that user story the correct one? And if so, can you take us deeper in how you help solve those problems?
Yeah, I'd say that is a pretty accurate user story, probably the main one that we're thinking about. It's really, I would call it it's for new growth leaders because it really is a the playbook especially is a step-by-step detailed walkthrough, really like back to basics, just to make sure that you learn everything. I don't know about you, Kevin, but like when I was going to school, like there wasn't like a degree in grants programs, running grants programs or building grants programs, not even courses around that. So it's like a relatively new thing in Web3. It's something that you learn just kind of like when you get into the workspace. So it's for new growth leaders, and it's also for veteran ecosystem leaders as well. There are really detailed deep dives into specific design spaces within a grants programs. And it's for both new programs and existing programs. So you can follow the canvas and catch all the details needed to launch a highly impactful grants program right on your first try. And it's also a really great tool, the canvas itself. It's a convenient framework for detailed look at every aspect of your grants programs. So you can really focus on further optimizing and actually getting the results that you're looking for in your grants program. And the example you gave of this kind of like token rich or like large treasury kind of group, that is definitely like one key audience. And I'd also say like, particularly of interest to the audience maybe listening here is this was also created and written for those who are part of maybe community groups or impact networks. We have a whole section just on fundraising and using unique Web3 mechanisms to fundraise. So that's kind of like, I would say, the gamut of the user stories there.
Just wanted to invite the listeners as they're following along that you can download the grantscanvas.gitcoin.co. And if you want to follow along visually, the resource is a very visual book, so I would invite you to pull that up and poke around at it as you listen to Coach J. Yeah, any other call to actions for people just to be able to follow along visually as we're talking?
No additional things. Grantscanvas.gitcoin.co, free PDF download of the Grants Canvas. You can pop it right into a Miro or Mural or whatever whiteboarding software you use, and start playing around with it.
So give me an overview of the grants canvas. I see that there's 4 phases of program design in the canvas.
Yeah, 4 phases: define, design, execute, and learn. And we also recommend, when it was written, following these steps. Obviously, if you have an existing program, you're not really as interested in reviewing some of them. You can skip around where you are. But the intention of the design was so that you have to backtrack as little as possible when following the flow. And then within each of these phases, we can dive into the building blocks. So let's talk about the first, probably, in my opinion, what's like the juiciest phase is called the define phase. And I actually think that this is the phase that probably gets skipped over the fastest, just based on my research, and yet has the greatest impact on the success of a grants program. So the define phase, and I would also call the define phase kind of like your funding allocation strategy. And I would define that as your strategy for allocating funds, for lack of a better words. So you start off by setting an objective. And as much as we think, oh yeah, objectives, easy, it was surprising to look around Web3 and find how many grant programs didn't really set clear objectives. And in doing user interviews with folks who've been in the space now for several years around this is constantly what comes up as the number one reason why programs fail, is that they don't set strong objectives that actually create clarity for what it is that they're trying to create, the change that they're trying to make, the growth that they're trying to achieve. After you set a really strong objective, you'll create measurements to actually track whether or not you're achieving the objectives and how well you're achieving those objectives. From the measurement phase, you'll move down into really honing in on your audience. And typically within kind of the user story that you first described, there's 2 main audiences. There is an audience of builders that are, usually trying to be attracted, but there's also an audience of end users, the beneficiaries of the actual projects. There's just, I've read so many articles about the reasons startup fail, and like always hovering around the top 3 are not talking to their customers enough or not like really listening to the market. So that kind of falls within there, is really knowing your audience and what it is that they're looking for. And then the last aspect of this define phase is funding. So if you don't have money to distribute in a grants program, you're not running a grants program. And so funding has you really take a look at like, what is your budget? Where are the funds coming from? Is it through a DAO governance process? Are you just, going to your founder, your VC-backed org, maybe just the founder gets to say yes or no? Or maybe there's some serious fundraising efforts that need to happen. So with objectives, measurements, audience, and funding, you're looking at your define phase. I'll just pause there, see if there's any questions before I continue, so that we're not listening to me talk for 10 minutes straight.
I mean, it's a podcast where you're the guest, so happy to have you talk.
Right.
So what I heard here is that there's 4 phases. There's define, design, execute, and learn. There's 4 phases to having a grants program that actually creates growth for your ecosystem and is effective. And one theme that I heard you really emphasize is the need to set up your program in the defined stage for success, and that defined stage creates the conditions for success in the latter three stages. And so, if you were going through a grants program design without going through the define phase first, then you're kind of not really setting your team or your ecosystem up for success.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
What's next after the define phase?
So after define, we'll actually start designing the grants program. And this is, I think, where people jump to. And it's definitely like the most fun and maybe sexiest part of it is we start off with the funding mechanisms. Don't we just love to pick the funding mechanism first? And I know that we're going to be.
It is capital allocation season, and I am a mechanism nerd. So, but I wanted to call it out. This is an anti-pattern. The funding mechanism is kind of like the engine in a lot of ways, but you have to make sure if this was a car that the rubber meets the road and that it's got taillights and front lights and a windshield and windshield wipers and all that thing. So like, I think that like for me as an engineer, I'm recognizing that an anti-pattern is only focusing on the mechanism and not all of the other sort of like soft tissue stuff on top of it.
Exactly. We can talk about this a little bit more, but I think that one of the biggest opportunities of the grants program campus is that this grants design space has been progressing nicely, but what's missing is that the design space around capital allocation has blind spots right now. I think that there's a general tendency in Web3. I've been in the space now for about 2.5 years, and there's been an over focus on the funding mechanism part, which is understandable. Like, we're a bunch of tech nerds, and that I think that the funding mechanism is really where the on-chain world gets to really have fun and innovate in novel new ways that, philanthropic organizations, governmental organizations, academic institutions, they're literally, it's like, it doesn't even exist as a possibility for them. So we end up over-indexing on that funding mechanism aspect, whereas the design spaces all around it get neglected. So, skipping ahead, we go from funding mechanism. Later on, you're going to in the design phase, you're going to design your application. And now that we've distinguished that as a design space, one thing I think Gitcoin has done a great job at is already defining that design space and creating a tool. Something that Gitcoin's going to be talking a lot about in the coming months is their checker tool, right? So leveraging LLMs to actually, run applications through and verify that application reviews are probably the most laborious and time-consuming part of running any grants program. And so by identifying that as a design space, where like a problem space where we can design things, we've now created a tool that simplifies that process. And lo and behold, we've created this like amazing tool for a grants program manager because we've defined that design space, right?
So on the grants canvas, I see that we're on the application stage of the design space, and just to play back the checker thought to you. Checker is a tool that Gitcoin built in order to use LLMs to feed the LLMs your eligibility criteria and all the grant descriptions. It does a bunch of research on all the grants, and it provides you with default acceptance or reject decisions, which you can then override and then execute. So basically, kind of taking the pain out of having to accept and review hundreds of applications in your grants program.
Okay, so I'm kind of going out of order here. So we finished define, we're on design, funding mechanisms, and funding mechanisms, the reason...
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to remind the leader that if you go to grantscanvas.gitcoin.co and download the canvas, just as you kind of play jazz all over the canvas, having a visual to anchor you to is really helpful. It's almost like, when you're playing a video game, there's like a mini map in the corner. Like that's what the grants canvas is on my screen right here. So feel free to follow along by going to grantscanvas.gitcoin.co, and you can, as CoachJ crisscrosses all these things, you can follow them. But anyway, sorry to interrupt. I just want to give that listener that grounding. Go ahead and proceed. Let's keep going.
Yeah. So funding mechanisms, you're going to choose that based on objectives. Doesn't that make sense? You figure out what it is that you want to accomplish, and then you choose the funding mechanism to do that, right? Yeah. It makes sense when you say it like that.
It sounds logical, but you'd be surprised how many people do not do that when they design grants programs and they don't know what they're getting into.
That's it. So we go into a lot of detail about the different funding mechanisms, the pros and cons. There's no right or wrong mechanism to choose. It really just depends on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. They all suit different situations, different levels of organizational maturity, different budgets, different goals, etc. So that's the funding mechanism. Then you actually move into eligibility criteria. So that's crafting that criteria used to decide by which applications are either accepted or denied into the program. and then you'll create the application. So lots of considerations with applications, not just with regards to cool tooling like Checker and stuff like that, but thinking about, questions that are scalable. It's great if your grants program is only getting like 50 applications. Maybe I don't need a checker tool. Maybe I can review things manually. But once you start getting like 1,000+ applications, like, no, I'm not going to read this 2-paragraph essay on why I think your project is or is not a public good, right? It's too much. So, really smart application design is a huge focus in the design section of the Canvas. So define, design. Those are the first two phases. We ready to move on?
Just looking for the window so that I could unmute. Yes, let's keep going.
Okay. Next is execute. So this is where we get into action. First thing first, I think this one isn't like one that you need to spend a lot of time on, but it is a roles and responsibilities quadrant. Just taking like a quick breath to get organized about who is doing what. This is where a lot of the coordination failures happen around grants programs. So just taking a time on who has decision rights, who's doing what, how are you assembling your grants operations dream team is the focus of this little quadrant, the execute phase. Then you'll move on to the engagement part. This one also is a pretty huge lift. It's really all about getting the word out about your grants program. How are you attracting that ideal builder candidate? How are you not just attracting that candidate to being informed about your program, but how are you creating the right communications to have them feel to entice them to actually apply, and then actually creating the support systems to make it easy enough for them to apply and actually participate in your grants program, and then further supporting them once they've been accepted and you need to continue to communicate them. And that's just communicating with grantees. You might need to communicate with funders if you're fundraising. Gitcoin has been running, we just wrapped up GG20. GG21 is around the corner. Donors, if you're running a quadratic funding round, is a huge communication play as well. So this is what the engagement quadrant is all about. And then the last step of the execution phase is what we call disbursement. So it's just the payouts and just sorting out the details, like what currency are you paying in? What chain are you going to use? Is it a native token? Is it a stable coin? Are there lockup periods? KYC, AML, what are the details around that? So it's just a prompt to really make sure you're thinking through all those details. And then finally, we added in this learn phase. So there's only 2 blocks here. The first is retrospective. The TLDR is just do one. Just ask for feedback. Ask the grantees for feedback. Ask the community for feedback. Just like take one moment to look back, see how things went, reflect on what worked, what didn't work. By the way, the Canvas is also an amazing retrospective tool. In the playbook, the Grants Canvas Design Playbook, we provide instructions on how you can run a retro using the Canvas. So you can actually hone in on each aspect of your program and see what worked and what didn't work, and then decide on what problems you want to tackle ahead of your next round. So retrospective is one. And then the last one is reporting. So just figuring out who needs to know what information and in what format you want to present it in so that you can get those key takeaways to the right people, the right stakeholders, to be able to make decisions on how to proceed. So that's the Canvas in a nutshell. Define, design, execute, and learn. And then I should probably add at the end, rinse and repeat.
It feels like you've kind of just like packaged up all of the things that Gitcoin and the people around us have gotten wrong over the years to give people a way of just knowing the map of the territory before they get into it. And like, I almost to mix my analogies a little bit, it's almost reminds me of like bumper bowling, where it's like I can't get a gutter ball if I'm using the grants canvas on my first grants program design.
I love that. I wish I put that in the book. I did not put that in the book, but maybe in the next edition we'll include that. Yeah, I think that's one of my biggest takeaways from undertaking this process. We've been talking about grants at Gitcoin for a long time, and having had the opportunity to actually do this research, conduct all these interviews, and write this book, realizing how incredibly complex this like running a grants program can be, and being able to take it and distill it into being able to answer. I don't know about you, but probably the most common question that we get at Gitcoin is like, where do I start? And that's the purpose of the tool. It gives you that visualized, layout for exactly where to start and how to proceed.
I'm curious if you have any crazy stories about grants programs, like things that surprised you in the research process about just what people are doing or not doing as they're running grants programs in this space.
I think there's a few things that we already mentioned. Choosing the funding mechanism before all,
Hmm.
that's fine. One thing I've heard again and again I've seen is just like grants programs that are really actually marketing campaigns in disguise.
Hmm.
Just choose some marketing KPIs instead. Probably going to be much more effective.
Hmm.
And I would say, like, just to like hit this home again, the objective setting piece. I can't even tell you how poorly some of the objectives have been set across the ecosystem, and how often we mix up words, even like mission and objectives, which are two very distinct things that actually make a difference in terms of how you're communicating, what it is that you're trying to accomplish with the program. Yeah, I know there's like, I've personally met a lot of amazing people in the Web3, like brilliant minds. And I know we're all just like kind of trying. And even me taking a look and like really breaking down like what is an objective, like I also was like, oh yeah, I don't really know what it is. Now I do.
I've kind of been making it up as I've been going along this entire
Yeah,
time until.
I think we've all been kind of doing it, right? And I think that's part of the nature. That's why the canvas is also such a cool tool. Like one of the inspirations for the canvas was actually, before this, I was in the startup space as an executive coach. That's where the CoachJ name comes from. And super common at like these accelerators were the business model canvas. I'm sure your listeners have heard of the business model canvas. It's like 15 years old, and it completely revolutionized the way that people can ideate on business ideas. It's like it's all about rapid iteration on business ideas and finding a clear value proposition in like 20 minutes or less. And it just accelerates the process like big time. Instead of writing these big honking business plans that are like 20 pages, you can spend 20 minutes and hit on something that you can actually move forward with. And so it's cool. We're going to continue to YOLO and eat it all out. And I'm hoping that, and I think we're hoping, at Gitcoin is hoping that this tool can help folks yeet with more success.
Yeah, I mean, I think the person that I'm thinking of as the ideal consumer of this book is someone who actually, I'll just tell a story, and I
Yeah.
will redact any names. But I was at an event recently within the last year in which I was an ecosystem of between 20 and 200 people, of which there are dozens in the Web3 ecosystem. So hopefully I'm not doxing anyone, but basically their charismatic leader came up on stage and made this provocative announcement about delivering hundreds of millions of dollars worth of grants in their ecosystem over, and good on him because he wanted to fund what matters to his ecosystem and make sure that that ecosystem was successful. But you could see the look on like his lieutenants' faces of like, oh fuck, how are we going to operationalize this? I think that, like, if you're the kind of person that work would be handed off to in a Web3 based ecosystem, and you actually have to turn that vision into reality, then this is like your life raft, or your bumper bowl, or your bumpers in bowling, I think is the analogy I used before, in order to translate that vision into action. And hopefully by maintaining this set of best practices, Gitcoin's all giving back to the ecosystem. But I mean, let's be plain here, it's kind of a marketing vehicle for Gitcoin. Gitcoin sells grants and growth to these ecosystems. So that's sort of the cross section of the community that I see it hitting. And I'm wondering if there's any other personas you have in mind, any other like archetypes of people that you would like to be able to help.
I think that we're really just starting with the grants program, your typical growth lead or grants program manager. Like, I appreciate you kind of calling out it's a marketing tool, but like at the end of the day, also, like this is a non-proprietary tool. It's an open source tool. It's under Creative Commons license in the most open form possible. So anyone could remix, reuse this thing if they want. The point is that at Gitcoin, like we're clear, grants programs work. And we're trying to solve problems in capital allocation. One of the reasons I joined the space was because I was working with a lot of folks in the social impact space. I was working with these like super inspiring founders who are trying to make their cities carbon neutral, founders who were creating like financial education programs at their credit unions, founders who were giving voices to journalists who didn't normally have voices, like just incredible people. And like they were just getting constantly shut down by systems that wouldn't fund them. And when I heard about the possibility of tackling some of these coordination failures on getting funding into the hands of people who can make the most impact, I got like super excited about that. And grants right now is the game that we're playing. There's, I think, a much larger game that we're going to be playing over the long run. But right now, grants is where we're focused. It's a really exciting space. It's a growing space. I think it's because people do see the benefits of it. And what we're trying to do with the canvas as well is like, we just want to make it easier and more accessible to launch and grow a grants program. Like, we want to see more grants programs because that means that we're more effectively distributing capital, and that creates more opportunities for people on the edges of networks. And so I think that's all a plus. In terms of other user stories, like to go back to your question, I think like right now we're really focused, like I said, on the grants program. But like, super secret alpha tip, this is a grants program design canvas, but it's also kind of just like any incentive program design canvas kind of thing. Any incentive-based program, whether it's airdrops or whether it's governance delegate incentive programs, anytime where there's like an application in order to receive funds, you can use the canvas and plan out something really effective that has you reach your goals, that has the right people get the rewards, and it's all about like maximizing that impact.
I was mentioning this to you before we started recording, but this season of Greenpill is all about capital allocation. What are the weird, more precise, more scalable, more democratic ways that we're going to distribute capital on chain? And I love that you sort of said that this is an incentivization design program canvas, and we're sort of blending the boundaries between grants, which is something that has existed for hundreds of years, and this sort of more abstract, non-skeuomorphic design space of capital allocation. And I just wanted to make some space for you to respond to the thesis of the season, which was we're going to do more weird, more precise, more scalable, more democratic capital allocation on chain than has ever been done before. Anything that sort of perks your ears up about, or any reactions to that thesis as someone who's studied the design canvas, grants canvas for so long?
I guess my only reaction is that I think that we're constantly making baby steps toward getting to this like maxima that you've probably talked about on your show a bunch of times. And I think the canvas just gives us like a little methodology, if you will, a way to record what's working and not working. I hope that this is definitely not the final version of the canvas. I hope someone else out there sees this and invents some other tool or whatever it is that's way better than this. But this is like that first step that allows other people to build on it. I've heard before, like, I don't know how true this is, but I'm just going to believe it for now, is that there's like enough resources on this planet for everyone to live a comfortable, flourishing life. And it really just comes down to distribution and the effective distribution of capital, not necessarily whether there is enough or not. And so I see all of these little things as little pieces that build up to something greater that we can't quite see right now, but I know that we're heading in the right direction.
I love that as a North Star, except I'll call out that to have effective distribution of capital, you need effective allocation of capital. That's been one thing that we've been talking about is the minute differences there, but allocation is deciding where to spend the money, and then distribution is actually transferring it.
That's a good distinction. It's good to distinguish those two, the actual distribution versus how to allocate it. I appreciate the nuance there. Yeah.
For sure, yeah. Okay, let's get into final questions. If you are maximally successful, how does this impact the world? How does the world change over the next 5 to 10 years if the grants canvas is maximally successful?
5 to 10. I mean, grants program canvas, everyone in Web3 who runs a grants program is using this thing, and it's proliferated well beyond Web3. I mean, philanthropic organizations, government organizations, they catch wind of this thing. They start getting interested in the unique funding mechanisms that we're experimenting with here in the Web3. That would be pretty cool. Imagine governments using conviction voting in order to distribute funding to a municipality. That sounds like a radical idea. We're seeing more grants programs. I think that one thing I mentioned at the top of the show, I think that one of the unique opportunities with the canvas is this design space around grants, it really opens up. It becomes more visible, and it actually invites more people to contribute and actually start helping us to tackle this problem, this on-chain capital allocation design space. And then I'd also love to see new use cases beyond grants forming. So beyond even incentive programs, maybe there's things that I haven't thought of that this canvas could be used for or iterated on.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say?
No, I guess we didn't start the show by asking how I was doing today, but that's more of like a Canadian thing that I do. Like we just like, hey, how are you doing? And I just say fine, even though I'm not maybe that fine. But that's the only thing we
Okay.
missed, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if our editors could edit that in, edit some manners into my co-hosting style at the top of the episode, that'd be great.
All
I
right.
want to
Awesome.
end by quickly shilling. I actually haven't talked about this on the podcast before, so this will be the first unveil of it. But we're looking at during Q3 and Q4 of 2024 doing guest seasons where basically we decentralize the host role, me, to other people in the community and allow them to go off on their own little adventure, similar to how we did Impact season 3 and Capital Allocation season 4. And we got a bunch of great applications from co-hosts that are well known in the ecosystem and can take us on these journeys, and you are one of them. So if you decide to do it, which I don't think that you've committed yet, but can you shill us the season that you pitched to Greenpill and what you would be covering in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to start off basically with a deep dive of the canvas. I mean, we really just scratched the surface for all of these different steps, these quadrants. Like, there's a whole world of objective setting. There's a whole world of measurements. We're talking about key results versus leading indicators versus lagging indicators versus, how are you creating really powerful, specific, granular measurements to actually get what you want? There's just like a whole world of nuance to go into within each of these design spaces. And I'm planning to bring the greatest minds in Web3 to have conversations about where their head is at in terms of solving these problems. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Love it. Well, stay tuned for that season coming soon, TM on Greenpill. Coach Jay, thanks for the grants canvas. I think it's public good for the ecosystem and really excited for the listeners to check it out. You want to shill the download link in the call to action real quick before we break?
Yes, grantscanvas.gitcoin.co. And if you're listening to this soon after it comes out, we'll be in Brussels as well at EthCC 7 on Monday, July 8th. We're having an amazing event in the afternoon. We're going over the canvas, but in kind of like a really experiential way. We got an amazing lineup of people. It's a Gitcoin and Tally event, but we've also got folks from Hatch Protocol. We've got folks from Stable Lab there. We've got folks from Protocol Guild, MetaGov. It's like a really solid lineup. And if you've ever been to a Gitcoin event, there's always good vibes. So make sure to come join us IRL if you can.
Great. So the call to action is go to grantscanvas.gitcoin.co, download the book for free. You can buy a copy of the book, which will be physically shipped to you. And then if you're coming to EthCC, check out the link in the show notes to the Gitcoin, Tally, etc. party. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Coach Jay. This is great.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, we just heard from Coach Jay about the grants canvas and the accompanying book. I'm excited about him and his work because Gitcoin's mission is to fund what matters by decentralizing the knowledge of how to launch a Web3 grants program. We are doing that. We are realizing that mission, and we're also playing with capital allocation and actually doing it. Thanks again for listening to the GreenPill.network podcast. Again, we feature the people who are building a coordination, a network society of hackers, dreamers, and doers using crypto to bring positive sum digital systems to the world, like Coach Jay and the work that we are doing at Gitcoin. If you value our work, you can go to pods.media/greenpill and collect this episode. All episodes are available on chain. Thanks again to MMA on chain for being a top collector of the Greenpill podcast. Really means a lot. Helps us finance the production of these podcasts, which we just run at cost, and they're really an offering for the Web3 ecosystem. While you're here, if you're not into on-chain collecting, please hit like, rate, or review on your podcast player. It really helps the algorithms spread the word about the region and the Web3 movements. Thanks again for listening. I will see you on the next one. Peace.